Hello my dear students. The topic that we are going to discuss today is environmental security, which is a part of your syllabus of conflict resolution and peace studies. The relationship between environment and security has been under consideration since the 1960s, mainly by two groups. The first was the environmental policy community, which sought to address the security implications of environmental change and security. There were various occurrences and events that triggered the growth of environmental movement during this period of time. One book that we have already discussed during the topic environmentalism in contemporary political theory course was Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring, which was one of the extraordinary publications of that time. This book Silent Spring brought greater degree of environmental awareness among ordinary people by warning them of the dangers to all the natural systems, including animals and food chain, from the misuse of chemical pesticides such as DDT. While Carson contributed to public debate of the time, she cannot be considered as a very radical social revolutionary in relation to environmental issues. There were a number of new organizations that emerged during that time, which were founded, that took up a more radical role in relation to environment. One of these was World Wildlife Fund, also known as WWF, which was founded in 1961. Another was Friends of Earth, FOE. It was founded in 1969. And third, more well known to all of you, is Greenpeace, that was founded in 1971. So this took up a lot of responsibility of mobilizing opinion regarding environment throughout the world. The second reason that played a very important role in bringing this concept of environmental security was the fact that security community of the time was looking for new definitions of national security, because there were a lot of changes in the global situation, the scenario in the post-Cold War period. It was soon acknowledged that global impacts of environmental change, depletion of ozone layer, transboundary pollution had very clear security implications, and this in turn made the military authorities to re-evaluate the security dimensions of environmental issues. We all know that security was traditionally seen as a synonym of national security with two main objectives. First, to preserve territorial integrity of the state, and second was to maintain the preferred form of government by political and military means. So when political scientists took up the environmental aspect of security, they defined environmental impacts as being part of the security issue. This approach attempted to redefine the concept of national security completely. In the early 1980s, the Independent Commission on Security and Disarmament Issues, ICSDI, developed and introduced the concept of common security, giving the idea of national security a broader perspective. Additionally to the traditional security aspects, other non-traditional threats to security such as economic decline, socio-political instability, ethnic rivalries, territorial dispute, international terrorism, money laundering, drug trafficking, as well as environmental stress were also incorporated. The World Commission on Environment and Development clearly linked security with environment in its deliberations. The 1987 Brundtland report stated that humankind of the time faced two very important threats. First was that of nuclear exchange, and the second was environmental ruin worldwide, and that was becoming a fact in near future. Following this interlinkage by different organizations, the General Assembly of United Nations officially introduced the concept of security and environment in its 42nd session. In recent years, this concept of environmental security has been understood extensively, including human, physical, social and economic well-being, giving the scope hardly any limitation for interpretations. The United Nations Development Programme only refers to it briefly in its 1994 annual report on human development by saying that environmental threats countries are facing are a combination of the degradation of local ecosystems and that of the global system. These comprise threats to environmental security. The Millennium Project assessed definitions of environmental security and created a kind of synthesis definition. The environmental security actually, according to Millennium Project, actually refers to environmental viability for life support with three sub-elements. First, preventing or repairing military damage to the environment. Second, preventing or responding to environmentally caused conflicts. And third, protecting the environment due to its inherent moral value. It considers the abilities of individuals, communities or nations to cope with environmental risks, changes or conflicts or limited natural resources. For example, climate change can be viewed as a threat to environmental security. Human activity impacts CO2 emissions, impacting regional and global climatic environmental changes and thus changes in agricultural output. This can lead to food shortages which will cause new political debates, ethnic tensions, civil unrest. Given this, a comprehensive overview of the environmental security field implies that environment is the most important transnational issue and its security is an important dimension of peace, national security and human rights. Over the next 100 years, 1/3 of the current global land cover would be transformed. Hence, the world will be facing increasingly hard choices among consumption, ecosystem services, restoration, preservation and degradation. Now, let's turn to different dimensions of environmental security. Human beings depend on Earth's ecosystems and services they provide. These include provisioning services such as food, clean water, regulating services such as disease and climate regulation, cultural services such as spiritual fulfillment, aesthetic enjoyment, and supportive services such as primary production and soil formation. The degradation of these services often causes very significant harm to human well-being, which explicitly includes human security. Second dimension refers to the area of violent conflict. Violent conflicts often result in direct and indirect environmental damage with associated risks for human health, livelihoods and ecosystem services. There are also examples where war hinders resource extraction because it makes certain areas inaccessible to commerce with the unintended effect of protecting the resource base such as forest cover or marine fish stocks, though this effect is often reversed once commercial exploitation resumes. In many other cases, once the conflict is underway, high value resources such as gems, oil, timber become a source of finance for combatant forces. Indeed, many civil wars since 1990s have been financed by illegal exploitation of such resources. Wildlife in this sense is the fourth largest illegal trade after the trafficking of drugs, people and arms. The third dimension refers to vulnerability and conflict risk. Environmental degradation is a cause of human insecurity and in many cases serves to aggravate other sources of social division based on factors such as ethnicity, class, religion or economic position. Currently, there are 1800 resource related conflicts worldwide, many caused by extractive activity that polluted or damaged the land, air, water, forest, livelihoods of communities. Such conditions may contribute to sustained social conflict, often with sporadic violence, and in some cases, control over natural resources is a central driver of armed conflict. The fourth dimension refers to the capacity for conflict management and prevention as well as recovery. Managing shared natural resources sustainably and equitably can motivate greater cooperation within and among communities. It can also help build institutions that moderate and reduce disruptive impacts of conflict or aid post-conflict reconciliation and rebuilding. This occurs at local levels, as in the interaction of farmers, herders, who may share mutually dependent and symbiotic relations, which can lead to cooperation during times of prolonged drought. Also within countries at a significant scale, such as national movement of community managed forest institutions, which happened in Nepal, that sustained ties of mutual support despite breakdown of state institutions during the period of civil war. And transboundary scale also, which we can see through our Indus Water System Treaty with Pakistan, which has moderated the competition for water since many decades, more than 6 decades, between India and Pakistan. Now let's focus on environmental conflicts in South Asia. Most countries of South Asian region share common borders that result in unique conflicts as far as the environment is concerned. Resource sharing, especially river water sharing, remains an important issue between the countries. We know about the Indus water issue between India and Pakistan, and we have an Indus Water Treaty because of that, which is primarily a treaty for distribution of water between India and Pakistan, and that it has been brokered by World Bank to use the water available in the Indus system of rivers, which is actually located in India. The Indus Water Treaty, the IWT as it is known as, was signed in Karachi in 1960s. 1960 were the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and the then President of Pakistan, Ayub Khan. The sharing of Ganga water between India and Bangladesh is also very important in this connection. It relates to appropriate allocation and development of water resources of Ganga Nadi that flows from northern India to Bangladesh. The issue has remained a subject of conflict for almost 35-40 years, with severe bilateral agreements and rounds of talks that have been going on since more than 35 years now. Migration is also an issue directly linked to environment as far as India and Bangladesh are concerned. Bangladesh, being the downstream country, is very much dependent on India, which is the upstream country. So every time the rivers are flooded in India, the effect is felt in Bangladesh very severely. And also every time there is less rainfall, Bangladesh faces shortage of water much more than India does. We need to focus on resolution of these conflicts by focusing on people's interests in the South Asian region, as well as on commonalities that we have in relation to environmental issues. There are many major environmental issues that South Asia is facing as a region. These include climate change, geophysical settings, ecosystem changes, overgrazing, import of hazardous wastes, deforestation, desertification, pollution, population pressure, collapse and pollution of land resources, water resources, then lack of potable water, also biodiversity loss and food security risks. This must take precedence while negotiating in relation to environment within South Asia region. Environmental security has been described as a bundle of issues which involve the role that the environmental natural resources can play in peace and security, including environmental causes and drivers of conflict, environmental impacts of conflict, environmental recovery and post-conflict peace building. The scope of security and insecurity is by no means limited to violent conflict or its absence, but includes the roots of sustainable livelihoods, health and well-being. Environmental security underpins the rationale for investment in global environmental benefits and is essential to maintain the Earth's life-supporting ecosystems, generating water, food and clean air. Reducing environmental security risks also depends fundamentally on improving resource governance and social resilience to natural resource shocks and stresses. The environment is better protected in absence of conflict and in the presence of stable and effective governance. The United Nations Environment describes environmental security as a conceptual envelope, including a variety of issues involving the role that the environment and natural resources can play across the peace and security continuum, including environmental causes and drivers of conflict, environmental impacts of conflict, environmental recovery, and post-conflict peace building. The Kyoto Protocol is an international treaty which extends the 1992 United Nations Framework of Convention on Climate Change (UNFCCC) that commits state parties to reduce greenhouse gas emissions based on scientific consensus that global warming is occurring and that it is extremely likely that human-made CO2 emissions have predominantly caused it. The Kyoto Protocol was actually adopted in 1997 in Japan, Kyoto, and it was implemented with the objective to reduce the onset of global warming by reducing greenhouse gas concentrations into the atmosphere. The protocol is based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. It acknowledges that individual countries have different capabilities in combating climate change owing to economic development, and therefore puts obligation to reduce current emissions on developed countries, mostly European and American countries, on the basis that they are historically responsible for the current levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. There have been problems between countries because of this, and negotiations have been held, and one such negotiation was held in 2000, which is going to end in 2020, and the commitment period ends in 2020, and this Kyoto Protocol negotiations resulted in 2015 adoption of Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was a separate instrument actually under the UNFCCC, and it was in fact can be considered as an amendment of Kyoto Protocol. The Paris Agreement deals with greenhouse gas emissions mitigation, adaptation and finance. This was signed in 2016. The agreement's language was negotiated by representatives of 196 state parties at the 21st Conference of Parties at near Paris, one place called Le Bourgeois. I don't know, maybe the pronunciation is a little different. As of February 2020, all these members, many members had signed this agreement, and the Paris Agreement's long-term temperature goal was to keep the increase of global temperature, average temperature, to well below 2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade, recognizing that this would substantially reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. It considers that it should be done by reducing emissions as soon as possible, and we need to achieve a kind of balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removal of sinks of greenhouse gases in the second half of the 21st century. So I think we have studied a lot today. Please do ask me questions in the comment section if you don't understand something. I have tried to include all the points. Hope you like it. Thank you.